The silence after Derek Morrison's words felt like falling. And this is where the analysis falls apart completely. 23 pairs of eyes. One polished conference table. My quarterly report glowing on the screen behind him. 6 weeks of my life reduced to kindling. Derek didn't even glance at the slides. He looked straight through me, the way you'd examine something pinned to a board. The methodology here is fundamentally flawed. Short-sighted assumptions. Lazy research. He tapped his pen against the table, each click a small detonation. This kind of work doesn't belong in a leadership presentation. Heat flooded my face. My colleagues, the same people who'd called this work brilliant last Tuesday, suddenly discovered their laptops were fascinating. The air conditioning hummed. Someone's phone buzzed into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. This wasn't feedback. This was an execution. I gripped my notebook until my knuckles went bloodless, keeping my face frozen while my heart tried to kick through my ribs. The room felt like it was tilting, but I stayed upright, eyes fixed on a scratch in the table 3 inches from my hand. Derek paused, waiting for something.
Tears, maybe.
Or an apology. Some visible crack in my composure that would complete whatever tableau he'd come here to paint. I gave him stone. The silence stretched out like taffy, thick enough to choke on. Someone cleared their throat. Leather creaked as Tyler shifted in his chair. Finally, Derek nodded a small, satisfied motion and said, "Let's move on." Just like that. The meeting rolled forward without me, conversations resuming as if the last 5 minutes had been a commercial break. Papers shuffled. The next presenter stood. Life continued. But something inside me had crystallized.
Hardened.
Like metal shocked into a new shape by sudden cold. The hallway felt aggressively bright after the conference room's dim. I walked carefully, legs uncertain, hands still trembling. People passed with those awful sympathetic glances that somehow hurt worse than Derek's words. Kyle from marketing touched my shoulder briefly, said nothing, kept walking. That nearly broke me. Halfway to my desk, the thought arrived fully formed, sharp as broken glass. My VP publicly destroyed my work. Then I sent his private messages to the board. Not a plan. A prophecy. I'm Saskia Okoye, 34. 7 years at Cascade Analytics, longer than Derek's been warming that VP chair. And what just happened wasn't a mistake or a bad day, or even unusually harsh feedback. It was strategic, calculated, designed to leave marks, which meant my response needed to be all those things too. 3 weeks ago, Derek's messages told a completely different story. I pulled them up now, door closed, office quiet, hands finally steady. That crystalline coldness from the hallway had spread inward, numbing the ache. Strong direction on this, Saskia. Exactly what leadership wants to see. Methodology is solid. Proceed as outlined. Really impressive analysis. This positions us well for Q4.
Dates.
Timestamps. His digital signature on every approval I'd requested. Line by line, he'd guided this project. No, more than guided. He'd shaped it, praised it, sometimes seemed genuinely excited about it. I scrolled through weeks of correspondence, seeing it differently now. Every public criticism had been privately approved first. The flawed methodology? His suggestion. The lazy assumptions? His confirmation. Derek knew exactly what he was doing in that conference room. This wasn't about my work. This was about destroying me for reasons I didn't understand yet. That presentation wasn't random. It was tied to my promotion review. Next month. My entire trajectory at Cascade. The project had been designed to showcase strategic thinking, analytical depth, leadership potential. Everything needed for the senior director role I'd been told was within reach. Derek had known. He'd been part of those conversations. 2 weeks ago, he'd mentioned it casually in the hallway. That Q3 presentation will be important for you. Make sure it's bulletproof. So I'd followed his guidance like scripture. Double-checked every figure. Verified every source. Built the analysis exactly how he'd outlined in our private meetings and message threads. The presentation he'd just eviscerated in front of 23 people was one he'd helped architect. The pattern snapped into focus with brutal clarity. He'd built me up privately, then demolished me publicly. I didn't know why, but I knew this couldn't be the ending. Late that afternoon, Derek materialized at my desk. "Hey, Saskia. Good effort in there today." His tone was light, almost breezy, like we'd just wrapped a normal Tuesday. "These presentations are learning experiences, right? Don't take it too personally." I looked up, forced my face into something resembling professional composure. "Thank you for the feedback." He nodded, satisfied, and vanished. Probably thought he was being magnanimous. The supportive leader offering encouragement after tough criticism. Inside, something locked into place, crystallized into something unbreakable. I understood now with absolute clarity. Reacting emotionally would only give him ammunition. The upset woman, the defensive employee who couldn't handle pressure. That narrative would die before it started. If Derek wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. Then I'd rewrite them. That night, I opened our complete message history. Not skimming, not searching, reading, systematically, chronologically, like studying for an exam that would determine the rest of my life. My apartment was silent except for laptop hum and occasional cars passing outside. I made coffee, settled onto my couch. Started from January. The patterns emerged slowly, then all at once. Derek positioned ideas as collaborative and private. Let's explore this approach. What if we tried this methodology? But in meetings, those same ideas became entirely mine. Saskia's proposal. The direction Saskia chose. When things went well, credit diffused broadly. When anything was questioned, responsibility landed squarely on me. Always subtly. Always with plausible deniability. Just the natural way organizations work, right? Except the private messages told a different story. His fingerprints were all over this project. The framework, the data sources, the analytical approach. Everything he'd criticized today, he'd either suggested or explicitly approved. The pattern was undeniable, and it was all documented. I created a new folder on my personal laptop. Q3 Project Correspondence. Simple, neutral, devastating. Then I started copying. Every email, every chat thread, every document where Derek had provided guidance or approval. I didn't rename anything. Didn't add commentary. Didn't highlight or annotate. Just saved everything exactly as it existed, original dates and timestamps intact. 3 hours later, the folder contained 47 separate documents spanning 3 months of collaboration. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to misinterpret. I backed it up to secure cloud storage. Then again to an external hard drive I locked in my desk drawer. Maybe paranoid. Maybe unnecessary. But as I finally closed my laptop at 2 a.m., I felt calmer than I had in hours. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building something. There was strange power in that. A steadiness that came from knowing the truth and having proof. Derek thought he'd buried me today. He had no idea what he'd actually planted. The next week's leadership meeting, Derek did it again. Sharper this time. More concise. Almost rehearsed. He questioned my judgment on a minor decision, implying it showed poor strategic thinking. 90 seconds, maybe. But everyone heard it. Sideways glances around the table. Pity mixed with relief. Thank God it's not me today. Tyler looked genuinely uncomfortable. Brenda from finance studied her notes like they contained nuclear launch codes. I kept my posture perfect. Shoulders back. Expression neutral. Didn't defend. Didn't argue. Just nodded slightly, made a meaningless note, waited for the conversation to move on. Inside, I wasn't surprised. This was a campaign now. A deliberate pattern of credibility demolition, probably to justify passing me over for promotion. Or worse, to create grounds for managing me out entirely. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I knew something Derek didn't. This had an ending. Just not the one he'd written. That night, sitting on my apartment floor, back against the couch, I finally let myself feel it. The humiliation. The rage. The crushing unfairness of being punished for work I'd done exactly as instructed. For a moment, the weight pressed down so hard I couldn't breathe. I thought about quitting. About escalating to HR. about confronting Derek directly and watching his face when I mentioned the messages. Then I thought about those 47 documents. 3 months of correspondence. Every criticism contradicted by his own written words. Truth doesn't need volume or drama or emotional appeals. It just needs to reach the right eyes. I wasn't going to rage or cry or beg. I was going to wait, document,
Prepare.
and when the moment came, I would let Derek's own words speak for themselves. The decision settled over me like armor.
Cold.
Protective. Absolutely certain. Over the next 2 weeks, I changed my approach entirely. Stopped pushing back. Stopped asking probing questions. Nodded more. Agreed more readily. Made myself smaller, quieter. Exactly what he seemed to want. And Derek grew bolder. His criticisms became casual, delivered as asides. He interrupted me more frequently. Dismissed my input faster. Other team members started checking decisions with him instead of me, even on my projects. The undermining was working. I could see my influence evaporating in real time. A month ago, people sought my opinion. Now, they avoided eye contact. But Derek's confidence was his mistake. Because as he grew more comfortable, more certain the narrative was set, and I was neutralized, he got careless. He kept sending detailed guidance. Kept approving decisions. Kept leaving a paper trail that directly contradicted his public position. Every message was another brick in a structure he didn't realize he was building. A structure that would eventually collapse on top of him. The private messages kept coming. Ironically, even as Derek publicly dismissed my capabilities, he privately relied on them. Strategy questions late at night. Analysis requests over weekends. Detailed guidance on complex problems. Always through private channels where others couldn't see his dependence on my work. Can you pull together those projections? Need them to look sharp for the board. What's your read on the Westfield proposal? Want to make sure we're aligned before I present. Strong approach here. Move forward with this framework. I saved every single one. The folder grew. 20 more documents. Then 30. Each message a small irony. A tiny piece of truth he was too arrogant to recognize he was creating. I responded professionally to everything. Delivered what he asked for. Maintained perfect performance despite the public demolition. Because consistency mattered. When the truth finally emerged, there could be no questions about my work quality or professionalism. Only questions about his. Late October. Leadership requested background materials for an upcoming board review. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. They needed context on major initiatives from the past quarter, including my Q3 project. Someone needed to compile documentation, organize materials, create a coherent narrative for board members. During a leadership meeting, I volunteered. I can pull that together. I have all the project files organized already. Derek nodded absently, already moving on.
Fine.
Get that to Amanda by Thursday. Make sure it's comprehensive. He agreed without hesitation, without suspicion. After weeks of public criticism and my quiet acceptance, he believed I was beaten. Neutralized. Not a threat. That was his second mistake. The first was the paper trail. This was worse because it gave me legitimate reason to organize everything and permission to send it directly to the board liaison. Wednesday evening, my dining table disappeared under printed documents. Organized stacks. Laptop open. Reference materials spread across every surface. I worked methodically, precisely, like building something that needed to be absolutely perfect. The presentation went in first. Full version. Complete appendices. Then Derek's private messages. All of them. Chronological order. Completely unedited. Each clearly labeled with date, time, sender, recipient. No commentary. No framing. No highlighting that might suggest manipulation. Just context.
Just the full story.
Just Derek's own words placed directly beside the work he'd publicly destroyed, showing exactly how involved he'd been in creating it. 93 pages when I finished. Professional. Comprehensive. Devastating. My hands stayed steady the entire time. No shaking. No second-guessing. This wasn't revenge. This was transparency. The complete record anyone doing proper due diligence would want to see. Thursday morning, 9:47 a.m., I forwarded the packet to Amanda. No dramatic pause. No ceremonial moment. Just open email. Attached the PDF. Wrote a brief professional message. Clicked send. The whoosh sound felt strangely anticlimactic. I'd imagined this moment being bigger somehow. More significant. But it was just another work email between coffee refills. I leaned back. Breathed out slowly. No taking it back now. The truth was in motion, moving through channels I couldn't control or predict. All I could do was wait and see whether the system would recognize what I'd shown it. Whether Derek's own words would be enough to undo the narrative he'd so carefully constructed. I saved a copy to my personal folders. Then I closed my laptop and went for more coffee, feeling lighter than I had in months. A day passed. Then two. Nothing changed on the surface. Meetings happened. Projects moved forward. Derek ran the weekly leadership check-in like always, confident, commanding. But something felt different underneath. Subtle shifts I couldn't quite name. Derek started avoiding eye contact. Not obviously. Not in any way others would notice. But I saw it. The way his gaze would slide past me in meetings. How he'd suddenly remember something urgent whenever I approached. Conversations lowered when I entered rooms. People checked phones more. Amanda passed me in the hallway twice. Both times her expression was carefully, deliberately neutral. Something was moving. Something was happening. Just not where I could see it yet. The waiting was harder than I'd expected. Not because I doubted the evidence, but because I had no control. The truth was out there now, being read and considered and discussed in rooms I wasn't part of. All I could do was keep working.
Keep performing.
Keep being exactly who I'd always been. Tuesday afternoon. Patricia from the executive team asked to meet. Just need to clarify a timeline on the Q3 project, she said casually, but her eyes were surgical. We sat in a small conference room, and she pulled out a printed copy of my materials. Several pages had sticky notes. She asked precise questions. Decision points. Key discussions.
Who was involved?
Her tone was carefully neutral, neither accusatory nor supportive. Just information gathering. I answered calmly, referencing dates and messages already in the documentation.
Didn't defend myself. Didn't criticize Derek.
Just confirmed facts, walking through the timeline exactly as it had unfolded. And this guidance here. Patricia pointed to one of Derek's messages. This came before you finalized the methodology, he later questioned.
Yes.
About 2 weeks before. That message is September 8th. The presentation was October 2nd. She made a note, flipped pages, asked another question. We talked for 45 minutes. When we finished, Patricia thanked me professionally and said nothing about next steps. But I knew I'd been heard. Really heard. Maybe for the first time since this nightmare started. Derek stopped criticizing my work after that meeting. Actually, he stopped talking to me altogether. No more guidance requests. No strategy questions. No casual hallway conversations. In leadership meetings, he called on everyone except me. When I spoke anyway, he'd nod briefly and move on without comment. The absence felt louder than the criticism had. More revealing. I knew now that someone had shown him the messages. That he understood what I'd done and what it meant. The paper trail he'd created so carelessly was now sitting in front of people who mattered, telling a story he couldn't talk his way out of. Other people noticed too. Kyle asked quietly if everything was okay. Brenda mentioned things seemed tense. I kept responses vague and professional, just focused on my work. Which was true. But I was also watching. Observing the small cracks forming in Derek's confident facade. The way he seemed distracted. How he checked his phone constantly. The tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Power doesn't always fall dramatically. Sometimes it just starts to slip, slowly, one small moment at a time. 2 weeks later, the board requested a follow-up meeting. Without Derek. The message came through Amanda, phrased carefully as a project debrief to gather implementation insights. But everyone in leadership knew what it really meant. This wasn't routine. This was investigative. Executive conference room. Windows overlooking downtown. 6 board members and 2 senior executives I'd only met a handful of times. The atmosphere was professional but intense. Focused. They asked about decision ownership. Who made specific choices? How guidance flowed. Whether I felt supported and empowered. The questions were direct but not aggressive. No one accused Derek of anything explicitly. They didn't have to. I answered honestly, sticking to facts and documentation. When they asked about the public criticism, I said it had been surprising given the private guidance, but that I understood leadership meant accountability. I kept emotion out of it. Just truth. Just clarity. For the first time in months, I felt actually seen. Not as a problem or a disappointment, but as a professional capable of complex work. Someone worth listening to and trusting. Within days, leadership began reframing the narrative around my Q3 project. Suddenly the analysis was ambitious, comprehensive, well-researched, and thoughtfully executed. The exact phrases Derek had used privately, now being said publicly, in forums that mattered. But this time without him in the room. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. In the next leadership meeting, our CEO mentioned the Q3 framework as a model for future initiatives. Tyler referenced my methodology in his own presentation. Brenda asked me to consult on an upcoming project. People started making eye contact again, including me in strategic conversations, seeking my input genuinely, not out of obligation. The professional death Derek had been orchestrating quietly reversed itself. I didn't celebrate or gloat, just kept doing excellent work, showing up fully, being exactly as capable as I'd always been, except now people were finally allowed to acknowledge it. The truth had done its job. The rest was just natural consequences playing out in real time, without any additional effort from me. 3 weeks after my board meeting, Derek was quietly removed from the Q3 initiative entirely. No announcement. No explanation. Just a calendar update showing different ownership. An email reassigning responsibilities. A new reporting structure that bypassed him. He remained VP, technically, but his actual authority had been hollowed out. People noticed, of course. Leadership changes never go unnoticed. But no one asked questions directly. No official statement was made. That's how these things happen at senior levels. Power doesn't crash. It just slips away quietly until one day you realize someone who used to make decisions doesn't anymore. Derek's office lights stayed on later now. His calendar showed more one-on-ones with HR and legal. The confidence swagger had vanished entirely, replaced by something tighter and more defensive. I felt nothing watching it happen. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just calm recognition that systems, when given complete information, tend to correct themselves. Truth creates its own momentum once released into the right spaces. Mid-December. I was offered expanded responsibility. The promotion conversation reopened, this time without conditions or asterisks. Senior Director of Strategic Analytics, reporting directly to the CFO instead of through Derek's chain. More budget authority. More visibility. More autonomy. The offer came in a meeting with Patricia and the CFO, presented as recognition of sustained excellence and strategic leadership capabilities. They mentioned my handling of the Q3 project specifically. How thorough it was. How well I'd managed complexity and pressure. Nobody mentioned Derek. Nobody referenced the public criticisms or private messages, or any of the ugliness. It was all just handled. Resolved. Behind us. I accepted calmly, thanking them professionally, feeling something finally lift that I'd been carrying since that first terrible conference room moment. The weight of injustice just dissolved. Not because Derek had been punished, but because the truth had been recognized. My actual capabilities finally matched how I was being treated and compensated. That was all I'd wanted. Just fairness. Just accuracy. Just to be seen clearly. Derek resigned in early January. No farewell email. No goodbye tour or thank you reception. One day his office was full. The next week it was empty, stripped of personal items and family photos. His name disappeared from the leadership directory. His access badges stopped working. People speculated quietly. Mutual agreement. New opportunities. Personal reasons. The official line was vague and corporate, revealing nothing specific. But everyone understood. His credibility hadn't survived being placed directly beside his own contradictory words. You can't systematically undermine someone while simultaneously relying on their expertise and expect no one to notice the disconnect. Eventually, the truth emerges. And once it does, there's no explaining your way back to trustworthiness. I felt no triumph watching him leave. Just quiet recognition that dishonesty eventually consumes itself. That you can't build sustainable success on undermining others. That truth, given time and proper channels, tends to prevail. The chapter was over. For both of us. Time to move forward. Late January. I presented to the board for the first time in my new role. Same conference room. Similar crowd size. But everything felt different. This time when I spoke, people leaned forward. Asked follow-up questions. Engaged genuinely with the analysis. No interruptions or corrections or subtle undermining. Just professional dialogue between colleagues working toward shared goals. My voice didn't shake. My hands stayed steady. The presentation was strong because the work behind it was strong, and now there was no one standing between that reality and how it was received. Afterward, the CEO stopped me in the hallway. Excellent work, Saskia. Exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need. Simple words. Basic professional affirmation. But they landed differently than they would have months ago, because now I knew they were genuine. Not performative. Not provisional. Just honest recognition. I thanked him and walked back to my office, feeling settled in a way I hadn't in years. Not because I'd won some battle, but because I was finally working in an environment that matched my actual contributions. That alignment, it turned out, was worth everything I'd endured to reach it. Looking back now, months later, I understand something important about what happened. Revenge doesn't have to look like rage. It doesn't require dramatic confrontations or public accusations or emotional destruction. Sometimes revenge looks like patience, like documentation, like simply making sure the right people see the complete truth, then letting that truth do its work. Derek taught me that dishonesty requires constant energy to maintain, that undermining others creates structural instability in your own position, that credibility, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. But I learned something more important. Know your worth. Protect your work. Document everything, not out of paranoia but professional self-respect. And never underestimate the power of the full truth, told clearly and completely to people who have authority and willingness to act on it. I'm still at Cascade Analytics. Still doing work I believe in. Still building my career. But now I do it with my eyes open, understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fight or argue or defend yourself emotionally. Sometimes it's just making sure the truth gets told, then stepping back and letting it speak for itself. Because truth doesn't need dramatics. It just needs daylight. And once it has that, it does the rest.